CBC's Chris Reyes has been following all of this for us, and she joins us from the United Nations in New York. And Chris, what more are we hearing from Jolie on those who were executed?
Hi, Ian. You know, when we first got wind of this story earlier this afternoon, it was very short on specifics. But as you mentioned, Minister Jolie revealed now to the extent to which the Canadian government worked to spare the lives of these 4 individuals whose families have asked for privacy and therefore their names are not being released. Jolie said that there were several attempts on multiple fronts to advocate for clemency for these dual nationals, that Global Affairs work channels in Ottawa, in Beijing, and other parts of China, that she raised it with a Chinese foreign minister at the G20 summit, and that then Prime Minister Trudeau was also involved. Jolie said that this is what they would do for any Canadian facing the death penalty anywhere in the world. Have a listen to what she said on Power and Politics with David Cochrane.
Every single time that a Canadian is facing a death penalty around the world, maybe in China or other countries, we ask for leniency. Because we don't believe in that penalty, we don't have it in our country, and we are always there to make sure that there is a form of clemency. That's been at the core of how we conduct consular affairs.
And Ian, Jolie also made specific mention of Robert Schellenberg, who was convicted of drug trafficking charges and sentenced to the death penalty in 2019. She said that Canada continues to advocate for clemency in that case and provide him and his family consular services.
And how is China responding to all of this?
Well, China's rebuttal came in the form of a statement from the Chinese embassy in Canada this afternoon. Let me read to you what it says in part. China is a rule of law, according to the statement. Whoever violates the law of China must be held accountable in accordance with the law. Drug-related crime is a severe crime recognized worldwide as extremely harmful to the society and will be faced with severe penalties. In all countries, we urge the Canadian side to respect the rule of law and China's judicial sovereignty. Stop making irresponsible remarks. Now, it's estimated that around 100 Canadians are being held in China. We spoke to Veena Dajibula at the Asia Pacific Foundation to give us more context on China's record on executions.
Well, it's a deeply troubling development. Execution of foreigners is extremely rare, even in the Chinese criminal justice system, which has 99% conviction rate and carries out more executions than any other country in the world. According to Amnesty International, in fact, China carries out more executions than all other countries combined.
And speaking out against China's statement on this, Michael Kovrig, who we of course know as part of the 2 Michaels who were detained in China back in 2018 and finally released in 2021, Kovrig said that China's response should be viewed as empty propaganda, and he countered that China doesn't respect the rule of law. He called the executions a callous disregard of human life and human rights, and also indifference to the views of other countries. He called on the Canadian government to be relentless and insisting on consular services and calling for clemency for the Canadians being held in the country. And Ian, Minister Jolie also acknowledged this statement from Kovrig and she said she agreed with him.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. Our next guest has confronted the Chinese Foreign Affairs Minister on detained Canadians before, and he says China is sending a message to Canada. Peter MacKay is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. You believe what China did is not the rule of law as much as it is politically motivated. Why is that?
Well, Ian, I think that we have seen from China in the past and over some years now that they don't play by the normal diplomatic rules, to say the least, and they're not happy with what's going on. And I say this with some reticence, but they can do things like this, execute Canadian citizens, because they don't feel that Canada can do anything in retaliation. I don't think you would see this happening with some European countries or the United States of America. And despite the best efforts of our current foreign minister and the previous prime minister, they don't fear retaliation as far as what Canada can do. Obviously, we're not going to treat their citizens the way they treat ours, but they really feel that they are in an advantageous position and they can make an example of Canada.
Minister Joly says that these 4 Canadians were dual citizens, and you've dealt with a case like this before. How does China respond to this argument about dual citizens?
They simply don't accept it. And like other countries, including Iran, North Korea, if you're born in that country, you cannot be a citizen of another country like Canada. They simply don't acknowledge that you can hold a passport of another country or be a dual citizen. So they dismiss it out of hand. And of course, they don't have a charter or the justice system that we have that allows for full answer and defense and disclosure and an opportunity to appear before a judge with a lawyer. All of that is out the window. And so clearly, as we've seen in the case of Michael Kovrig and Spaver, Canadians in custody in China can they will experience very rough treatment and the inability to exercise any form of human rights.
In a statement, the Chinese government says that they are, and I think this is a direct quote, a rule of law country. Peter, when you hear that, what's your response?
Well, it's simply not true. Like a lot of things that come out of the communist dictatorship in China, they have no resemblance of a rule of law. They have no tolerance for dissent or people speaking out against their government or exercising certain rights. And so it's a very dangerous place for Canadians to be, as it is in Iran or North Korea. And so I think the travel advisories need to be constantly updated and in some cases stressed by the government of Canada as far as any travel plans or any business affairs. It's getting worse. The world is getting much more unstable, much more polarized, as you know, Ian. And I think that Canadians need to be, in some cases, forewarned from traveling to jurisdictions like this.
You've traveled the world as a representative of Canada and in your private life as well. Would you go to China to do business personally?
I would not. And my wife, who was born in Iran, will not return. She started an organization called Stop Child Executions. And that is another sad reality, that countries like China execute children for things such as changing religion or what's called apostasy or homosexuality or speaking out against their government, or even being born as a Tibetan or a Uyghur or being part of Falun Gong. All of this can lead to fatal consequences.
There are Canadians behind bars on death row in China as we speak, including Robert Schellenberg, whose sentence was raised to a capital case facing execution while the 2 Michaels cases being dealt with. Given everything you've said about China not being a rule of law country from your perspective, about how China feels impunity with taking actions against Canadian citizens or dual citizens, how do you think Canada can or should approach the case of Robert Schellenberg?
Well, there's a number of things I'm sure that are happening, and that is direct appeals, and it was referenced by Melanie Joly, where at international gatherings there's an opportunity to directly confront and interact with Chinese officials and ministers. It sometimes requires the leadership from the Prime Minister, him or herself. It also occurs to me that sometimes the intervention of other countries can help, particularly from the United States, the UK, some European allies. But it is very difficult. I have had those confrontational meetings with Chinese ministers in the past, both in China. In the case of Iran, I have met ministers from Iran. And it is that type of personal intervention, and I won't speak of these individual cases. One of them is sadly still in custody. But that sometimes does work or have effect or lead to leniency or clemency. Not always, but it takes persistence, and sometimes it sadly takes years. We have people in prison there who wouldn't even face a criminal charge for that conduct and that behavior in Canada.
It's really good of you to speak to us so late in the evening on the East Coast, and also for us to be able to tap into your years of experience on this file. Thank you very much, Peter.
Always a pleasure, Ian. Thank you.